for tuning into the Connor Chepnick podcast. This is episode number 12. Today I'm excited to be joined by Jens, who is the author of The Good Substack. Jens, thanks for taking some time to hop on today.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Always looking to chat with fellow Bitcoiners. So to get us started, one of the Substacks that really resonated with me is the idea that your body is this proof of work. And I think we've seen all this marketing around, being fat is good, and it's, to each their own, however you want to live, but I completely agree with you that the body is the ultimate proof of work. And as much as we want to tell people don't judge a book by its cover, people tend to judge a book by its cover. So I'd love to kind of hear what was the inspiration for that, and why do you think society is being so body positive while ignoring the side effects that come from being fat, like dying early, clogged arteries, whatever else, you name it?
Yeah, for a while now, I've really been fascinated and interested about the idea of what is the most perfect form of property, the form of property that is incorruptible, that can't be taken from you, that you own wholly and absolutely. And for me, just from a pure delineation standpoint, I think Bitcoin is the most invaluable property. And then second hand is your body, right? That's no matter what, you always have stewardship over your first mind, which is Bitcoin essentially, and then body. And the fact that most people today don't have control over their bodies, or they're given in totally and absolutely to their passions, to their lusts, to their gluttony, it shows that the essence of private ownership is on the decline, at least in the West. And having a body that you maintain, upkeep, and keep strong is the biggest thing in my life personally that I found that has helped me get to where I want to go, become more sovereign, get more money, whatever it be. Having a strong body has helped me have a strong mind. And it's really disgusting to see that body positivity movement is going around, that the most precious thing that we have on earth, which is our body, is just being totally abandoned. That we can have this thing that can be so good for us and it can do so much for us, but yet it's mean to call people fat if they're unhealthy, and it's not a very accepting, but yet they're totally disrespecting this great gift that we've been given.
Yeah, it's a double whammy too, because one of the things that people love to talk about Bitcoin is this idea that you can store 12 words in your head and go anywhere in the world with any amount of wealth that you can store in your head. And it just kind of makes me laugh, because I'm not saying all fat people are forgetful, but the more you let your body go, the less properly it's going to function, and the more likely you are. Could you imagine having a significant amount of wealth stored in your head, and then because you're out of shape, you forgot a word, and then I guess it's a donation to the rest of us on the network, but yeah. I think there's a clear correlation between being in good shape, how you feel about yourself, and how well you take care of other things in your life. If you're not willing to take care of your body, why are you willing to take care of your Bitcoin versus someone who's in great shape? They're much more likely to whether set up a multi-sig or make sure they properly handle their seed phrases or whatever it is. I think that's a really great point you made.
Yeah, a strong body is a strong mind, absolutely, and a weak vessel will be commanded by others, not by yourself. And I think that's really the starting point, for me at least, down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, is that I needed to be a vessel that I can command myself. And that starts, I think, first with physical fitness and eating right.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing you talked about in your Substacks were the importance of the nuclear family. And, as much as they want to push body positivity, the realistic thing is, if you want to find a partner who wants to have a family with you, and, you want to start a nuclear family and one that lasts, how you carry yourself is going to have huge implications for whether your partner wants to stay with you, whether your children respect you and, grow up to be like, your children are probably going to grow up to be like you in a lot of ways, and how you carry yourself will have a huge impact on them. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And you got some great pieces about that in your Substack. So interesting.
Yeah, the death of the family, at least in the West, is really sinister. And I don't think people really understand just how bad the consequences of this dissolving of was once, traditional and very accepted standard in society, but now has become something that is becoming out of fashion in some ways. right? It's more common to see a 30-year-old woman or a 30-year-old man who's alone than a 30-year-old family who has 5 kids, 6 kids, 7 kids, where that was once commonplace. And I think it is almost a direct attack by the state in some ways, because the state's biggest threat to me is strong families that have a sense of familial lineage and maintain a strong history of tradition and can maintain and preserve wealth over time, right? Dynastic, strong families. Because that is the biggest threat to government, is if families become independently wealthy outside of the regime. In in older times, when monarchies were more prevalent, right, the noble families, this is what kept the king in check in some sense, was the strong noble families that had a large portion of wealth, land, power, influence, to help check the power of the king. But that's becoming more and more so non-existent in the United States or in the West in general, with things like inheritance tax, income tax, declining fertility rates, the lack of bond between man and woman nowadays, the invent of dating apps. Most people don't really value each other as potential family members or potential wife or potential husband, but merely as objects to extract some sort of pleasure from. And all of these things, those 5 things, really attack at the framework, at the groundwork of what family is, which we can all see clearly today is it's pretty unique to have a big, strong, healthy family. And that'll be the number one, in my opinion, in the next 50 years, that'll be the number one status symbol, is a strong, healthy, happy family.
Yeah, I think about my great grandma who's dead now, but she had 9 children, and this is on my dad's side. For Thanksgiving every year, we always have a massive Thanksgiving with anywhere from like 100 to 200 people at a single house, and it's such a nice family tradition. And it is around the holidays, but whenever I'm spending time with my family during that, the last thing on my mind is pointing fingers or politics or all this other BS that I think sometimes when I'm spending too much time on Twitter, I'm thinking about. So I think that's such a good point about how the nuclear family makes you stronger. And then you also brought up inheritance taxes, and that's such a vicious attack on, and it's under the guise of like, oh, we need to tax the rich and make sure people are paying their fair share. But we're already getting taxed on our income when we transact with others. We're getting taxed again via inflation. And then now you're telling us the money that people somehow manage to save despite all of these things, they have to get taxed to pass it down. It's just like, it's like the government's spitting in our faces. And I think Bitcoin is such a hopeful thing that can fix that. And I'm not telling people to go out and like just completely ignore inheritance taxes. But at least this way you have some means or some recourse to make sure that, if you got your setup right and you teach your kids how to handle Bitcoin, the state has to send someone with a gun to your home to extract that wealth. That is your wealth. And when you're surrounded by family and you have these things, you become less reliant on, Big Brother to feed you, Big Brother for your Social Security check, Big Brother for your food stamps. And, you feel better about yourself. You become more self-sovereign. It just kind of ties into that whole proof of work thing. So I think more people need to be aware of just how screwed we're getting on this deal from governments. One thing I wanted to ask, and I'm completely with you that governments are definitely attacking the nuclear family, but I wonder if governments have considered the implications this might have on the demographics, because, I can't believe my great-grandma was able to have 9 kids and absolute stud, but, for people today, having 2 kids is like the normal. You rarely see anyone that has more than 2 kids. So how do you think this will play out with the demographics? Do you think governments have thought about that at all, or do you think they're just so focused on trying to break up the nuclear family they're not even worried about these second and third order consequences of their policy?
Yeah, well, in Denmark, for example, they're in more of a later stage, I would say, of the corruption of family. Family is really rare in Denmark, especially big families. And I think a lot of that has come down to the cost of living that has continually increased. But even now in Denmark, they're offering really big like tax incentives two families that will have multiple kids, many kids, right? Because if the birth rate keeps on declining in such a way, right, the pensions or the retirement funds, the entire welfare state of Denmark will collapse, and it will be not good for the government in the long run. And one thing that the government does, or they claim they do this, to help increase the birth rate, instead of increasing the native population through incentivizing childbirth through, right, the homogenous culture that has been there, they will actually take and implant large groups of foreign migrants as under the guise of, well, we need to increase the population and the birth rate so we can keep the welfare state running and have the taxes going, right? So there you see already a large demographic change happening throughout Europe. Japan is another example where they haven't even introduced really large migrant populations, but their citizens, the average age of each citizen is becoming so old that Japan is really worried about in the long term about how their nation is going to survive and thrive. So they're doing lots of programs to incentivize native homogenous birth rate amongst the Japanese.
It reminds me of the child one policy, or the China one child policy, where they were telling people you can only have one child, and if you have any more, you're going to get fined. And now they've completely reversed course, and it's just such a apt point on the shortcomings of central planning and what happens when you have a government in your home. And I mean, yeah, the cost of living ties into the whole nuclear family thing too, because if two people got to go out and work to provide an income, then you're giving your kids to. I did a podcast with Shane Hazel the other day, and he called it state indoctrination camps. And I think that's such a good point. We were just talking about the importance of language, and I also made the point that, like, if they called taxation currency debasement, or they called abortion child murder, I think people might be a little more skeptical to just accept such things with face value, regardless of how you feel about Keynesian economics or pro-choice, pro-life. Regardless of that, I think if you just called it what it is, it would be a lot harder for people to ignore some of these shortcomings of these things. And I'd love to get your thoughts on democracy versus monarchy, because I think monarchy is obviously hard to implement in modern day society where we have these massive nation states and whatnot. But I think there are so many shortcomings of democracy for all the good it's done. I think the sovereign individual does such a good job just showing why democracy is kind of a softer flavor of communism. Yeah. And I think now that we have something like Bitcoin, we can go to systems where we essentially outsource our democracy to software, to code, so people don't. I mean, governments should be there to protect private property, and outside of that, most central planning comes short. So I'd love to hear how you think about those two things.
Yeah, so I've been writing and thinking a lot about democracy and monarchy in government lately. Back when I was in high school, actually, I was really involved in learning about how great the Constitution is and how great democracy is and why it's the most equitable and fair and just system, and we're so lucky to have it. I even went and I competed in competitions in D.C. and won some competitions in D.C.
Oh, wow, like debates?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, regarding constitutional law, right, and talking about the philosophy of democracy and why it's such a good system. So I've kind of seen really both sides of the coin. And then I read a book called Democracy, the God That Failed by Hans Hermann Hoppe. He's a thinker in the Austrian School of Economics. Really good book. It was a big paradigm shift for me.
To check it out.
I figured and I learned, and I kind of just start to realize now that democracy sucks. It might just be one of the worst government systems that has ever existed. Even from a fundamental voting standpoint, right? As soon as you have three people, there's a thought experiment you can do. It's called the divide the dollar game. So you have $1, which is the public treasury, right? That's what you've collected. And now you need to get three people to vote on how they want to divide that dollar. The problem is that there is already almost an infinite amount of ways these people can vote to divide that dollar. Let's say person one wants, half the dollar. Person two wants the other half. These two people can then vote up against person three, right, and say, you don't get any, I get 50 cents, and I get another 50 cents. But then person three can come along and say, hey, person two, vote with me, you'll get 53 cents and I'll get 47 cents, right? And so already just from the fundamental standpoint of the voting system, it devolves into a tyrannical and chaotic, right, game theoretical mess that professors spend their entire life studying, but never can really find out like a solid voting strategy or voting method that produces like reasonable, fair, and the same outcomes over time.
Yeah, it's like that meme where there's like five people, and it's like 4 out of 5 people love democracy, and it's 4 people beating the shit out of one guy with sticks.
Exactly. And those four other people, I mean, I don't want to be super negative on humanity right now, but you mean just take any walk down the street, and you don't want those people making decisions for you, like nine times out of 10. And that's what democracy essentially is. It's the rule of the majority. The majority of people, I would say, are intelligent and unaware of the natural realities and laws of the world, and yet these people are making decisions for, smart, intelligent people that have their stuff together. It's a terrible system. And
Yeah.
to go along further, democracies, the incentive structure for politicians to act in accordance with the will of their constituents is non-existent, other than just wanting to get votes, right? That is a mechanism by which democratically elected leaders can, maintain their status and their wealth, is just by getting votes. But once they're in office, and especially if they have term limits and they know they're not going to be there for long, they have every incentive to move money around in their own benefit, right? Move the public good, the public money, the public treasury around to benefit themselves and to benefit their friends. And they have the incentive also to just move it around to certain particular ethnic groups or demographics to gain votes from them in the future. Whereas in a monarchy, if you are a bad king and you pass a 50% tax on your citizens, let me tell you, you might be really wealthy for a couple months, but you know what they did in France to bad kings? Yeah, off with the head.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't hide from it. As a king, as a monarch, you have to really, really care about the long-term investment into your citizens, right? Because also a king has ownership of the kingdom, of the reigning, the regime, of the government, of the land. And so the king has every incentive to lay off on the taxes of the citizens, because the more the citizens are taxed, the less likely they will be to invest and to make money and to increase the net worth of the property that they're on. Whereas the more they are taxed, the less they will care, the less they will produce value, the less they'll make money, right?
Yeah,
so
incentives.
it's reducing the bottom line, the worth of the kingdom over time in a democratic system. Whereas in a monarchy, it tends to grow and become better over time.
Yeah, it's better incentive for the rulers in a monarchy to treat their constituents or their people right. And it kind of ties back to this first point about the body being the ultimate proof of work. And when people's bodies get sloppy, they stop thinking properly. And a lot of people will accept the doublespeak. I just finished 1984 by George Orwell, which is a great book. And some of the stuff you see tweeted by politicians like Biden and Newsom, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, it is just pure doublespeak. I mean, the idea, California was talking about passing some bill about doctors will lose their license if they spread COVID-19 medical misinformation, which is just insane on the face of it, because who's to decide what's medical misinformation? What's false today can be proven true in a month or two. Science is obviously constantly changing. So that's just insane. But then to see him call out his political opponents and, to say they're trying to ban freedom of the speech. What made the Constitution so powerful, as I'm sure you know, is that it tried to decentralize power as much as possible. It saw the government as a necessary evil, and it tried to make the government as weak as humanly possible. That's why we have stuff like the Second Amendment. That's why we have these different branches, and that's why it's hard to get everything passed, especially when we don't have a Congress and an executive office that are on the same side of the aisle, because it's supposed to be hard to change these fundamental rights that the people have. And I'm curious what you think I don't think we'll be able to implement a monarchy per se in the modern world. I think with just how big, it's hard to govern effectively, and even when you have some of these smaller local governments, you kind of see. I've heard examples, of I think of like HOA associations in the United States. You give someone a little bit of power, and they just go hog wild with it. They don't actually respect that type of power. So I'm curious what you think. What type of system you think could be implemented going forward that would help humanity prosper and not be in such a situation where, for lack of a better word, the average layman has a vote for the guy who's providing the most wealth and prosperity to the community.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I too, at least for the United States, I don't think a monarchy will ever work. Right? There's some places in Europe, a lot of the nation states in Europe still actually have, they have kings and they have the royal family still intact. Should they ever take power again, right? They're right there, and they're smaller and probably could pull it off a lot better than, right, one ruling monarch of the United States of America. That would be kind of crazy.
Yeah, we'd be some type of dictator or something. It would not be a pretty scene.
It would not. Yeah, it would not be a sound governing system at all. The future of the United States, I believe, will eventually devolve into some sort of balkanism. I don't think the whole thing's going to stick together. I mean, the Civil War even showed us that, only 100 years into America's history, that, like having this one big governing body that was oppressing, groups of people, it just wasn't working very well. So I'd like to see states become a lot more essential, right? A much bigger role, as they should. At some of the founding of the Constitution, it was intended that they should play a much bigger role today, whereas most people don't even think twice about the state that they live in and what it does for them, and the particular advantages of living in a certain state, because the federal government has absolutely outgrown and outpaced the importance and significance of the state economy. I envision that it will decentralize to more state and more local powers once people lose trust in the United States government. And I think the trust in the United States government right now is hanging by a thread, which is the United States dollar. So as soon as people lose that, and they realize that the entire reality that they've been living in is bullshit, then I think people will look back to more towards their local communities once they give up on the dollar, because they no longer need the centralized system of currency, and they will form local communities. Right? People might even be living something similar to the 1800s, where they're just raising sheep. There's a local carpenter, local butcher. I think that would be a lot better for society as a whole. And these types of local decentralized governments, they end up forming something that looks a lot more like an aristocracy or more of a monarchy. I think that's kind of the natural progression of governments, right? Because after the fall of Rome, all of the little nation states in Europe, they crumbled, they fell, right? They were no longer under the emperor. And they all they went from this state of just natural rule, right? There's no rules, to a family accumulating a large amount of land, a large amount of wealth, a large amount of respect from all the other people for one reason or another, because of merit, probably, right? And right, a monarchical form of government was founded, right? Because a monarchy is just a family who owns the land, the right to rule over the land. It's really not a lot different from a landlord, right? But just on a much higher and extreme scale. And eventually, I think if things devolve to that state like they did after the fall of Rome in the United States, that like a rise of the natural elite or natural aristocracy is pretty likely.
Yeah, and I think so many people today are so afraid of that because of the convenience that something like an Amazon or a Walmart or a Target provides. And there's no denying. I mean, those places definitely provide a lot of convenience to people, but I think it kind of goes back to incentives. And when you get so big, Jeff Bezos could give. I mean, I'm not saying he doesn't give a shit about his company, but he doesn't care as long as the products are getting delivered. He doesn't care about the quality. He doesn't have any incentive to, he's just trying to make Amazon operate as smoothly as possible versus the local butcher who's constantly selling meat to his citizens. I was telling you before we started recording that my stepdad's got some land out in Montana, and some of the best meat I've ever had in my life is driving through those small towns where the people are the butchers in there, and they got their own shop. And I mean, you literally see the animals hung out in the back, but that meat is so fresh and it's such good quality. Versus, if I go to my local Star Market here, it's like, even I mean, I try and find the grass-fed stuff, but even then, it's not comparable to the small person, the small shop who's trying to provide the maximum amount of customer satisfaction because he's just more so incentivized to do it because he sees these people every single day. It's a more local, better, and maybe it's not as convenient, but the quality is just night and day. So I think that's really important for people to realize. And I'm with you. I think it's so easy to lose sight of the state power, and I think the whole thing kind of keeping the federal government in power is the U.S. dollar, and it is hanging by I love Greg Foss's it's the cleanest shirt in a pile of dirty shirts, or it's the best horse at the glue factory or something like that. Like, inevitably the incentives are just to keep printing this thing until we get Weimar Germany and this thing just completely dies. And I'm curious your thoughts on national divorce, and if something like that happens, if you think it'll be a result of the dollar, and then what monetary, I mean, obviously we're both Bitcoiners, so I think we know what we think it's going to be, but how do you think that would look, and if the U.S. dollar just completely failed, how do you think the states would deal with that?
Yeah, I think the states would have a very hard time, right, keeping the loyalty of their constituents. I don't think they would, frankly. And I mean, there will be a lot of probably pain in the beginning because the systems that people have grown to become reliant on will not be there for them, right? They will one day wake
next
up.
Day shipping.
Yeah, exactly. They will wake up one day and they won't know how they're going to get food, right? Because they've just been ordering it from Walmart their entire lives. They'll wake up one day and they don't know how they're going to get energy to their house, how they're going to clothe their children, because they become so dependent on these technologies and on these systems that they themselves have become independent from their own abilities, right? It's really sad to see how much of a house of cards it is for most people, their own subsistence and existence, that if the U.S. dollar were to fail, their job, their family, their house, their income, their food, everything about their lives, they are no longer able to procure for themselves, right? And once the USD fails, the government isn't going to be able to provide those things for these people. So there's going to be a lot of pain and a lot of hurt. But I do think that humans throughout history have been able to deal with adversity pretty well. And I do think that people would be able to sustain and provide in spite of all the difficulties. I do think national divorce is likely, and I think people will resort to barter, trading goods, Bitcoin, and maybe gold or silver, things like that.
Yeah, it's like that classic meme: hard times create strong men create good times create weak men create hard times, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And it just it's crazy to be living through a time where we have such abundance and prosperity, and yet we have so much malfunction across the system because the people in charge of it. One thing you did a really good job writing about is renting versus owning something. And I think the more stuff you can own in your life, it just goes back to incentives. The better off you are. You care about it more. And that's hard nowadays because to buy a home is obviously, as they print more money, the price of real estate just goes astronomical. And I understand it's hard to not rent in a lot of areas of your life. But I think some of the points you've been making, the more stuff you can own in your life, the more you'll care about it, the better quality it will be, and to prepare for the times ahead. I mean, I hope we're wrong. I hope we don't see national divorce and it's just all kumbaya, hoorah, and we just get this like world of prosperity. But the likelihood of that is slim to none, especially in a system where politicians, I'd say they're almost like renting the U.S. dollar. They're renting these seats in a way, and then every election cycle they try and do doublespeak or whatever works to get the layman to accept them and vote them in, and then when they get back in there, they just spin this thing. And it reminds me of the demographics point. Like, I don't think governments thought much about like, oh, if I break up the nuclear family, I'm gonna screw up our demographics, and then our country was gonna fall apart because we won't have enough money to pay out Social Security and all these other benefits. And it's kind of the same thing with the U.S. dollar. They're not thinking about like, oh, well, what happens if the dollar fails and then people can't even go to Walmart or Target or Amazon because the measuring stick that the economy uses is so out of whack and distorted that it's worth nothing anymore. They're just like, I gotta, I want this spinning package, or I want this pork in the bill, so let's just go ahead and run it up, and the next guy can figure that out. And it's not that monarchy is perfect, but I think monarchy in a lot of ways, the monarch has to consider these things, or else he'll be thrown out of office. Whereas in democracy, it's kind of like, I'm only here for X number of years, so I might as well get it while the getting's good and screw the next guy.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think it really does come down at the end of the line to a monarchy is a privately owned organization, and a democracy is a publicly owned organization. Whereas we all know that private golf clubs are a lot nicer than public ones. Private gyms are a lot nicer than public ones, right? Everything about the private system of ownership, it comes down to ownership, is better than a public system. Because if a monarch or the regime owns the right to government, right, they own the land, then they have every incentive to invest into the future of that property, of that land, of that regime. Because they want a regime for their children to take. They want their regime to be better off than when they left it. Whereas a democracy, they have every incentive to extract value from the common good, the public good now, take what they can, get their money bags, and then leave, right? And leave the state off in a worse condition than it was. Because they are just renting from that, right? They're the temporary caretakers of that regime, of that government. And over time, that will be very detrimental to any society.
Mm-hmm. So to anyone listening, obviously a lot of black pills about democracy. But for all our faults of the system, I do think the U.S. has had the best form of democracy. And as someone who's studied the Constitution a lot, I'd love to hear kind of, I guess for lack of a better word, the white pills you see in the Constitution and why, despite all these flaws, it's held up so well for, roughly about 250 years.
I think the biggest thing that America had going for it, from its founding to where we are now, is the lack of people, honestly, because the variety that the states offered, because you live in Boston, I'm in the West. Somebody living in the East that didn't like the state that they were living in could just move west. They could take what they have, whatever, how much it be, how little it be. They could take what they have and they could move for greener pastures, right? More freedom, less law, essentially. And I think that was the kind of the engine that was driving the economic prosperity of the United States for such a long time. But as soon as people started reaching west, and now people are just kind of flooding to the west, and that there is not that difference anymore, it became harder to flee an oppressive state for a more freer one. And as well as the constitutional system of federalism, which is having multiple states under a loose, or what should be a loose, binding federal state, it allows for the constituents of those states to be better ruled by a smaller head of state, the governor. because the governor will always know better what his constituents need than a president, or a mayor will always know better the needs of their constituents than the governor will, right? And a father will always know the needs of his family better than the mayor will. So it kind of goes federal, state, local, family.
No, it's beautiful, and I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that, like, the president of the United States is the commander in chief. They are the head of the military. They should be making sure that across the globe, America is safe. And I think another thing outside of our beautiful Constitution is just the fact that we have two shining seas separating us. So it's a lot harder for any nation state to come and attack us because they literally have to cross an ocean. And when you were talking there, it just made me think of, it should be no surprise that people like the WEF and I'll just say the kleptocrats around the world are pushing stuff like 15-minute cities because they want to make it so people cannot opt out of their tyranny. If you're going, I mean, like, it kind of reminds me of gun control. Like, regardless of where you sit on that issue, anytime you see the government trying to take away people's guns, it's typically followed by genocide. Whether you look at Nazi Germany, Maoist China, Stalin in Russia, when they start trying to take away people's guns, it's typically because they're trying to do some tyranny. And with these 15-minute cities where everyone's surveilled all day and no one has any weapons, no one can defend themselves, you're just stuck to the 15-minute area you're in. How do you opt out of that tyranny? I mean, they could jack up the tax rate to 99%. Now, productivity would fall through the roof because who would work at that point? There'd be no point. All your money gets taken immediately. But I think it's such a good point of what made America so strong. Now we're seeing the opposite trying to be implemented by kleptocrats around the world who don't want to give people the option to opt out. And I'm very hopeful we have something like Bitcoin to fix that, because if you have a form of money that you can store in your head and take anywhere, sure, they could implement these 15-minute cities, but it becomes a lot easier to leave with some amount of wealth versus just be like, well, it's like, this is where I grew up, and it sucks losing, the area you grew up in, but at least you can opt out to some degree now.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, just on the internet and in general, how many wealthy individuals are moving to what we consider as third world countries. And they're moving here because they, I guess El Salvador, for example, or Honduras, or St. Nevis and Kitts, right? All these little tiny third world countries, the wealthiest, the finest of people living from the Western countries are moving towards countries not because of their great infrastructure or whatever, but because they respect their individual right to property. And I think this is going to play a large role in the shaping of world governments from now on, is that states who respect the rights of their citizens to the right to the property, right? They're very favorable in tax laws and laws in general, right? They will see the wealthiest people move to their states, right? Gain their economic boost, gain their taxes, right? Gain their support. Whereas the states that are oppressive, they will see people leaving in hordes to the more favorable states, right? So it becomes a market economy of states on a global scale. And this is the future for states who don't adjust, who don't accept the Bitcoin standard, who don't accept and respect individuals' rights to privacy and property.
Yeah, and you just read, obviously we're both looking at it from the internet. I don't know if you've been to El Salvador yet, but like when I actually see people talking about boots on the ground there and what it's like, it seems to be a lot of excitement and like we want to build something here and it's special, and Bitcoiners across the globe are going there. And then you look over to the EU, and I'm no expert in Europe, but like you see Britain doesn't want to give up their pound, and they left the EU because they're not willing to turn over their money to a bunch of central bankers, and all these people are fighting, and I forget which country just it's not Romania, or some smaller country accepted the euro, and then immediately all their money got devalued, and I think people are getting pissed off, and it's kind of one of these things, pain's the best teacher, and as more people realize that our monetary system is broken, it's best to get out now if you have that amount of resources. And even in the states, the fact that we've seen so many people flee California and New York for states like Florida and Texas, none of these places are perfect, but I think it says a lot that people still in the United States are voting with their feet and leaving these states where they're just instituting absolutely heinous policies, taxing people ridiculous amounts. And I was just in Georgia, and I remember seeing a billboard that was like, in New York you can get an abortion, so move here. Something like, I'm paraphrasing, but like, I'm just thinking like, again, regardless of your, like, that's the sell. You can come murder your baby up here. Like, that is what, not, we got better tax policy, or we're the hub of innovation, or this is like, where the, center of the world is. No, you can murder your baby here. No problem with us. Come on up. Like, I mean, it's just clown world. I can't think of another way to put it. Just absolute clown world.
Yeah, for sure. And let me tell you, you said something there that I think is key that people don't understand, is the difference between voting, which we come to know it, and voting with your feet and voting with your dollar. Those voting with your feet and voting with your dollar are so much more important than whoever you vote for in any election. Because whatever you're voting, I mean, the odds that your vote, this is another just funny, like, just the mechanics of voting just doesn't work. The odds that your vote is going to change anything, like, you'd be better, you'd have more chances of winning the Powerball 5 times in a row than than that vote doing anything, of any substance, right? But voting with your feet and voting with your dollar is going to do much more for society, your family, for you as a whole, than getting caught up in the theatrics of politics that don't even exist anymore, right? Politicians, they all have the same agenda. It's just a matter of how radical do they want to get there. How, right? The left just wants to get to this dystopian hellscape right now, right? With not hiding it, and the right side, the Republicans, they just want to get there, but slower, right? They don't really stand for anything. Because in reality, they're all owned by the central banks. They're all owned by private interests behind the Federal Reserve. Ever since 1920 or 1913, 1914, I think, and when Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act, the interests of the state government became completely beholden to a private interest that owns the money, right? The state stopped caring about people from that point, and since that point on.
Yeah, I remember learning about Nicholas Tesla, and he was working with J.P. Morgan, who I got to go back and find, like, but one of my buddies sent me, like, who are the private shareholders of the Federal Reserve, and I'm pretty sure J.P. Morgan is one of those private shareholders. And when Tesla was like, we're going to have such abundant energy, no one's going to have to pay for it, J.P. Morgan was like, whoa. That's not going to fly. Like, how are we supposed to make money if energy is so cheap that everyone can have it? And it's like, it's not a laughing matter, but I don't know what else to do laugh about this, like, whole green energy movement. Like, yes, I think any sane person wants the environment to be as healthy as possible, and they want these flourishing ecosystems. But it goes back to what you're saying about voting with your money. When you spend and I mean, I'm guilty. Like, I try and avoid it as much as possible, but it's very hard living in a city to not shop at Amazon or Walmart or Target just because they can get the best prices for a lot of these things. But when you spend money for organizations like that, then they can lobby and they can buy these politicians and they can pass whatever legislation doesn't help the environment, just helps them offer a service for cheaper. Versus if you spend money at a local butcher or someone who's raising animals the right way or not doing factory farming or something like that, that is how you get to a better, a healthier future for the environment. But this idea that we can centrally plan a better environment, I mean, it like I said, I just have to laugh about it when I think about how the United States and other countries who have built the industries they have through fossil fuels want to go over to a place like Africa where people are dying in hospitals because they don't have reliable energy and say, no, you can't use a generator. You're going to have to use solar panels and wind turbines. And, if the energy isn't reliable because it's intermittent and, it goes out and someone, was in the middle of a surgery, well, that sucks. But, we can't have you polluting the environment with fossil fuels. And no one thinks about that because it's so obfuscated. But I think voting with your dollar, when you pay these big corporations and you give them your money, that's the stuff they lobby for, and they just try and virtue signal while letting stuff go on like that in the background. And like I said, I don't mean to laugh. It's just like, my God, like what a system we created for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, the left, they claim to have good intentions, but from what I've seen, every central planned policy that they try to impose to get where they want has the opposite effect of their desire. Right? A vegan wants a healthy, thriving ecosystem, and they end animal suffering. Right? That's what they want. But through their veganism and importing avocados from Mexico and from across the country, or buying crops from mega corn and soy farms that destroy everything in its path and completely eradicate and destroy the soil, they're ending a lot more life than they would have if they would just eat a cow that had been grazing on a pasture.
100%. I mean, they kill the biodiversity, they kill all the plants and animals in those fields, and it just absolutely ruins the soil, like you're saying. You think too, I mean, obviously, like, I like how Alex Epstein puts it in his book, how we have this like delicate nurture assumption, like nature's just this like nice thing. And one of the things you talked about, how's like in your Substacks, how winter's the best time to build your body, your business, your mind, all these things. And it's like the amount of deaths that occur because of cold weather are insane. And he's got a chart in his book that shows fossil fuel usage going up and to the right, and the amount of climate-related deaths doing the exact opposite, going down over time. And it's a direct result of the fact that because of reliable energies, we've been able to heat our homes, we've been able to survive in the winter, we've been able to mitigate all of these horrible climate catastrophes that just naturally occur. Regardless of what we do in the environment, the climate is a harsh, brutal thing. And we have to stop with all this virtue signaling if we actually want to create a more viable, healthy, vibrant planet. And I mean, the animal thing, that's like the idea that cows are the what's causing global warming. It's just heinous. Maybe factory farms are horrible, and like putting a cow in a giant factory and having them fart, I'm sure it's not great for the environment, but you can just fix that by having them roam pastures. But I think it kind of ties back into the dollar too. And I'd love to hear what got you down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Is it Austrian economics, or for me, it was the number go up technology, and then I stayed because I kind of saw like this fixes a lot of these broken incentives of factory farms and all this other stuff. I'd love to hear how you went down that journey and what you think Bitcoin can fix.
Yeah, so it was almost a year ago today that I kind of started my journey down the Bitcoin path. I was in college at the time. That was before I dropped out. And I had a professor. He was an economics professor. He was the only good one in the entire university, sadly, because everybody at university is just, they're shilling the new thing that the WEF wants you to learn, right? Especially if you're in an economics program. It's ugly. It is not worth your time. He's actually one of my neighbors too, a good friend. He introduced me to something called catalactics, which is a field of study within the Austrian economics school of thought. It's kind of similar to praxeology. I don't know if you're familiar with either of those, but catalactics, it's the idea that a market doesn't exist as a market. A market only exists as the individual transactions between each free acting member of the economy. Right? That's all it comes down to. Right? The idea that there is like an aggregate demand of the market is just a load of bull, right? Because that really doesn't exist. All it is at the end of the day is people transacting with one another. And so I started to read into Charlie Munger, and Mises at that point a little bit, and I was like, dang, I like this a lot. This is what I've been looking for. This is what they're not teaching me at school, right? This is this is antithetical to the indoctrination that they're trying to give me at this university. And he recommended that I listen to the Lex Friedman podcast. I don't really like that podcast anymore, but it helped me because I discovered two really valuable people in my life. And I remember I was sitting in my hot tub. I started at 10 o'clock, and I found a podcast with Robert Breedlove and a podcast with Safety Anonymous. And I listened to both consecutively. And I was in the hot tub till 5 a.m. that morning, just because it's like, this is it. This is everything that I have believed in my entire life is like, it is embodied in this Bitcoin, right? Like everything that I've been interested in, every problem that I've seen in the world, like it's right here. And like I felt such a feeling of ecstasy at that point. And from that point on, I've just been going deeper and deeper and deeper. And most people think, most of my family and my friends and the people that I've lived around just think I'm a radical lunatic at this point. I've gone completely Alex Jones. But I don't care, man. It's the best I've ever felt in my life, and it's been so good and so eye opening for me, and it has done wonders in my business life, my personal life, and in my relationships, to kind of see the truth of the realities of the world.
Man, it's so one of my favorite things about doing this podcast is just talking to other Bitcoiners and hearing their stories. And I've yet to hear one who isn't just so excited for the peace, prosperity, abundance, and hope that this orange coin can bring to the world. And there's so many different reasons why people get into this. And it's funny you brought up that, I forget, what is it called again? Not praxeology.
Catalactics?
Catalactics, yeah. I just wrote a piece for Bitcoin News titled, "Here's to More Markets, Not Less." And in that piece, I just talked about the idea that we don't know what kind of markets are available to us. I started out by asking, like, how many cars would you buy if you could buy nice cars for $500? Or if flowers, like really nice roses, only cost $1? Or, filet mignons cost $5? Like, if everything was just getting cheaper, how much more of that thing would you buy? And, I think in an inflationary system, people might hear that and think, like, that's ridiculous. That'll never be the case. But realistically, if we didn't spend so much money on this war machine, if we weren't sending hundreds of $billions to Ukraine to fight, it'd be like Russia sending money to Mexico if we invaded Mexico. Like, it makes no sense. And so much money is wasted on just bullshit, on stuff that shouldn't matter. Technology getting better should increase the productivity of everyone, so all our goods and services get cheaper and cheaper. And it's sad that Keynesian economists don't spend any time thinking about what abundance and prosperity deflation could bring to everyone. No one would be bitching about taxes or inflation if we didn't have inflation and we just let deflation take hold. And people would be like, oh, well, TVs are cheaper and you can get better quality. Okay, maybe like shitty consumer like pixels, but anything desirable, education, homes, healthcare, anything that you really need, quality food, it is through the roof. Anything that like is vital to having a healthy life has just gone up and to the right, and it's a symptom of broken money. And I know a lot of people, they roll their eyes and say, oh, this like Bitcoin thing. But just the more people I talk to, it's just so hopeful to see the hope and excitement they get about this thing. And it's a deep rabbit hole. You have to. It's not easy to run your own node, but just that idea that there's 21 million, and you can have a part of 21 million coins, and no one can take that from you if you secure it properly. It makes you want to take more self-sovereignty in your life, and it makes you want to be a better person, and it just makes you reassess so many things in your life when you kind of start to see the problems that the dollar brings about. And then start to see the way that Bitcoin might be able to fix these problems, especially on a long time horizon.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the biggest pills, or one of the biggest things that come along with learning about how broken and upside down the world is because of the money, is the value of time preference, right? You see that so many people are engaging in what we call high time preference behavior, which is extracting pleasure now at the expense of prosperity in the future. All of the bad things about humanity, if you want to look at a successful individual, and if you want to look at a unsuccessful individual, the biggest common denominator between those is the law of time preference. That one individual can put off pleasure now and towards investing into the future, and the other individual will rob themselves of a prosperous, happy, fulfilling future, so they can just scroll on TikTok and masturbate or do whatever they want all day, right? Because that was the biggest thing for me, is that I learned to examine all of my actions upon that frame of reference, right? Is this action, this thing that I'm doing, is it building me into the future? Am I going to be better off in the long run doing this, or am I going to be worse off in the long run doing this? And that framework alone, you can get so much done in your life, right? That's really all you need. If you can do that, then you're golden.
Yeah, it's one of the things I wanted to ask you about, kind of all the cheap dopamine that we have access to now via social media, via Netflix, via whatever, like tips and tricks that you've been able to implement in your life. And I think stepping back and examining, right, what action, and it's a fine line because like obviously social media can be a very powerful tool to help you build a business, to help you find other people like Breed Love and Safety and a Moose you brought up. I mean, podcasts, like what, just like to think that we have access to experts in whatever field, from Bitcoin to medicine to science to physics to, I mean, you name it, you can like listen to some of the greats, at the click of a finger. But I'd love to hear some other tips and methods you found to make sure you're using these tools to better your life and not just give in to the cheap dopamine hits. I think Twitter is a very valuable tool, but I also do find myself spending too much time on it sometimes. Yeah. And I'm constantly like, all right, how can I step back and make sure I'm leveraging in the best way possible rather than just sinking time into, doom scrolling.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's one of the biggest problems I see in society today, is that fire is a double-edged sword. It always has been. Or not fire. Technology is a double-edged sword. It always has been, always will be.
And fire is technology, so...
Fire is one of the first forms of technology. That's where I was going with it, is that fire is a really, really bad thing if you can't control it, right? It'll burn everything that you have in your life, gone, ashes. It'll burn entire forest down. All your food, gone, right? Burn your child, or burn your wife, whatever, right? It can be the worst thing ever for you if you don't know how to properly harness and channel that technology towards productive and good ends. But for humanity, for man to be able to find out how to use such a destructive force properly has launched humankind, right, into realms that they never would have thought possible, because they could harness this double-edged technology that could both be used for harm and could both be used for good. Mm-hmm. And technology today plays such a big role in most people's lives, but yet nobody is taught or educated on how to use it properly towards good ends. I see the younger generation coming up, and they're living, right, they're all TikTok minded, they're all on their phones constantly, and I can't even have reasonable conversations with them anymore. I think a lot of people genuinely lost the ability to communicate clearly because their dopamine circuits are so fried that they can no longer string one or more coherent sentences together in order to get their point across, right? Because they're thinking in such a short time frame, because they're constantly watching short form content, right? They're playing video games while they're watching TV. They can't even do one thing at the same time, or they're playing video games while they're scrolling TikTok on their phone. They can't do one dopamine task at a time because it's so fried. And I think this is so bad for the mind and the mental state of men and women, right? Because when you're doing this constantly, what's not happening is you building anything, right? All it is consumption, right? Good dopamine release comes from when you build something. Because you and I both know when we complete a task that we set out to do, whether it be a big or a small task, we feel better, right? We get that rush 100%. After we complete said task. And at the end of it, we're better off. We built something. Whereas people today, a lot of people, they get all of their dopamine purely from consumption, right? Consuming other people's products, consuming other people's content, right? And they haven't built, and at the end of it, they haven't built anything, right? They're worse off. Their time is gone, right? The biggest asset we have, our time, it's just fleeing from them like smoke. And so for me, I think in a lot of ways, for man, especially today, in general, that is the coming of age moment. That is what will set you off for a path to success or a path of failure, is if this great force of technology overcomes you, or if you overcome it and use it properly, right? So you have to be so disciplined about it. And I think that discipline really does start through physical discipline, through going to the gym, right? Because if you can get up every morning or go every day to the gym to put yourself through a grueling 1 hour workout, or however long your workout is, every single day, you're telling yourself, your mind, that, okay, I am the captain. I am in control of this ship. Most people can't even do that today, right? They can't even get out of the beds at a reasonable time, go on a walk. It's not good. And then your body will crave, at this point, if you're exercising regularly, healthy foods, right? And so you will become more disciplined in your eating. Because if you go hit a 2-hour-long leg workout and then eat a bag of Cheetos and mayonnaise directly afterward, you're going to feel like shit for the next week. Yep. Right? Your body knows, right? There's an imbalance where you've exerted yourself greatly, and your body knows I need milk, meat, and eggs right now, and that is all I want, and that is all I need. And you can eat as many milk, eggs, and meat as you want, and you will just feel better afterwards. Whereas eating shit food, it'll feel good in the short term, but in the long run, it's gonna hurt you, and you're gonna feel awful. And that is so just using that will force to force yourself to exercise to keep a strong body, I think that snowballs into so much more.
Oh yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because I think that is such a key point. You know, it's like the more I scroll Twitter, the more like just the less dopamine that it releases. It's like the law of diminishing returns. Like the more I do it, the less effective it is. Versus like when I go for a run, it's like the more I run, the better the runner's high I get, the longer I can go. And it's like the opposite effect. Like I want to run longer. I want to go for more runs. I want to be out in the sunlight. I want to exercise. You know, I read a great TikTok article by a guy named Gerwinder. I don't know this is whatever his name online. He's got a Substack called The Prism. And he talked about how TikTok atrophies your brain because you have this instantaneous dopamine hit. And that TikTok is even more malicious than some of these other platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Because on these other platforms, you know, you got to go around, follow people, you got to put in your interests, you have to actually interact with the app to get the most out of the algorithm. Whereas TikTok, the second you start looking at it and, you know, scrolling through videos, it notices how long you were watching. It doesn't, besides you just using the application, it doesn't need any input to start recommending you more and more addicting content. And then that atrophy in the brain, like you said, it's, you know, I haven't been able to talk, I guess, with so many people in that age range who are coming up with that. And it's such a new technology. We don't have the studies out, but I think it's very scary, the studies that will come out of that and what we're going to learn about how bad it is for atrophying your brain and not letting you sit down and focus and get like something meaningful done. You know, like thanks to Bitcoin, I've been trying to read longer books like Mises' Human Action or the Bible. And even then, like I've gotten better, but a lot of times I find I do have to break it up 10, 15 pages. Like some people are just built different, but like I would love to be able to just sit down 100 pages, boom. And I think part of the reason why it's not so easy to do now is because we have all of these instantaneous dopamine hits we can get on social media. And the brain is a muscle in the same way, but it's just more malicious because when you eat like shit and you don't exercise, people can look at you and tell that you've been eating like shit and not exercising. Whereas, you know, if you're spending all your time and atrophying your brain in that way, unless you spend a decent amount of time with someone and, you know, hear through conversation that they are just kind of losing it up there, it's a lot harder to see and realize that someone hasn't been taking care of their brain. Whereas with the body, it's just, you know, it's so apparent.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really good point, is that people can feign or fake being normal for a little bit, but spend an hour with them, and more often than not, you'll want to be out of there because you're talking to a brick wall. Right? Somebody that isn't really capable to really dive down into the depths of their mind and to think intelligently and then speak intelligently about whatever they're thinking about. Right? People used to have to go build log cabins from scratch, right? Start to finish. Right? No cut in between. They need to get this done or else they die. They will freeze to death. But people can't even like microwave a hot dog without scrolling on their phone while they're doing it nowadays. Like it is so pervasive throughout society today that it makes me sick seeing how most people live. It genuinely makes me sick seeing how people can't read a book anymore. They can't sit down and write anymore. They can't listen to a 1 hour long podcast, even though they'll go and watch 5 hours of TikTok a day but 1 hour of a conversation is too long for you to listen to because you can't keep your mind in track. And I think that comes down to it so much is that you have to hold your hand through every experience that you walk through, and that's what I do to get myself through it. I literally envision myself holding my own hand, saying, "Okay, let's not scroll on Twitter for 5 hours right now, right? You want to do something, you know it, so shut your phone off and think, and then get whatever you want to do done." You have to be like so precise and so exact to guide yourself through these situations, and that's always how it has been. But it's not like guiding yourself through battle anymore like it was, 500 years ago. But it's guiding yourself through the battle of your attention, because the two people I think that will form in society is people that can use their attention wisely, right? And people who can't use their attention wisely. People who use their attention to build things, and people who sell their attention for dopamine.
It's such a good point. I love the framework of literally thinking like through the thought experiment, like, all right, I'm going to hold my hand and go throughout the day, and like, what am I going to guide myself to the bag of potato chips, or am I going to guide myself to my running shoes so I can go outside, or I can go hit the gym? And that, you had a great point on Twitter, just talking, and what you just brought up now about how like back in the day people had to build their own log cabin, so they gave a shit about the quality of it. They built it from start to finish, and they really focused on making quality stuff. And I forget exactly what you said in your tweet, but it was something along the lines of how like most modern cities are just these ugly mirrors, like skyscrapers. And in Boston, it's so funny because I walk around and I look at the old buildings, man, and they're beautiful. Like there's some incredible historic stuff. And then, there's some modern stuff I like, but most modern stuff is just so brutal and ugly as all get out. And if you look at like the where the mayor of Boston resides and like that whole government building, it is fucking hideous. Yeah. But then you look at some of these other like Faneuil Hall and like the big clock in Boston, it's like, damn, like that is some beautiful architecture. And it's I mean, it's a perfect metaphor for, low time preference versus high time preference. And I think as great as technology is and how it's supposed to make us more productive, it only makes humanity more productive if we have builders. If we just have consumers and no one's building shit, well, I mean, Atlas Shrugged gives a perfect example of what happens, when you lose all the builders, all the people providing value because you demonize them for turning a profit, So I think it's you have to be very careful with what you consume and how you use your time.
It's going to be interesting because everybody just wants to make that internet money today, and I don't blame them. Right? I mean, it's good to have that source of income, and I think it's important that at least for everything you're doing on the internet, you have one thing that you're doing equal, like in physical reality. That's kind of a rule or guideline that I've set for myself. But everybody wants to go be, a financial analyst nowadays, but to go be a home builder or a plumber or a woodworker or an architect or a carpenter, like those things are becoming so out of fashion, and it's because the fiat monetary system is making those things harder and harder to be profitable on, right? A home builder now has no incentive to actually build a nice, beautiful home that will be beautiful 100 years from now, right? They have every incentive to make the grade, the standard for most doors today. It's literally cardboard surrounded by styrofoam. I could poke my finger through most doors. Right? The quality is just awful. It is absolutely terrible. Whereas, 17th century peasants, they were living in homes that are really more quality made than homes are today. Right? Homes literally are, and furniture, they're just crumbling apart. Right? All this IKEA furniture just made out of MDF, which is just medium density fiberboard, sawdust glued together. It's crumbling like in their own fingertips. And I lived in Denmark for a while actually, and it is so interesting to see the contrast between buildings that were built in the 18th century, right, with little technology, right, steam engine, like that kind of thing, to buildings that, with the advent of technology, should be even more grand and more beautiful, but you'd see them directly like juxtaposed right next to each other, like a beautiful church right next to a modern clock tower, and it is so grim. It is so disgusting that these modern architectural endeavors have infiltrated like this beautiful low time preference history and society, and it's really eye opening to you that people built better things with worse technology, right? It really comes back down to people, but it's because the fiat monetary system, it makes shit seem like gold. Because any house, any normal house or apartment building should depreciate in value over time. It should be getting less and less valuable because things naturally entropy. That's the natural state of matter. They get worse over time if you don't put work into it. Whereas I could go buy a 2-bed, 1-bath shithole down the street. 5 years from now, it might be 2x in value. It might go from $500,000 to $1 million in 10 years' time because of the broken monetary system. So people have this illusion that their property is actually appreciating over time, when in reality, it's just the money is going down in nominal terms against it.
Yep.
Right. The real estate's going down in nominal terms against the money. Whereas in order to build something that preserves value over time, you have to build it beautifully and you have to build it soundly. Because beauty is a value that transcends time and space. Right? That beauty will always be beautiful. The same beautiful things will always be beautiful. And that's why people put detail and beauty into their buildings before. But now it's become completely utilitarian. Whereas the only thing that you need to do in a building is have 4 walls and a door and some plumbing. And it will still go up in value over time. It's really like a subversion, upside down clown world in terms of real estate and architecture today.
And it's such a good point. And then, they'll throw in some AC and a laundry machine and people will be like, but the convenience, kings and queens didn't have air conditioning. I'm living better than them. But I mean, it's, one of the signs that money was broken to me is I bought a used car right after I graduated college in 2020. And it was right when COVID hit, and used cars were like selling for hotcakes because these rental car companies, no one was renting a car because the whole world was locked down. And since then, I've put about 40,000 miles on that car, and that car's worth like a couple thousand more now than when I bought it initially, despite 40. And I mean, a car is not an appreciating asset. Like, it should not be worth more. It's just the money is broken. And it kind of goes back to that point we made earlier. Is about like there should be more markets, and who knows what kind of beautiful things you could buy and the amazing types of markets that would be out there if we had a lot more builders, people trying to build quality stuff, versus if we had speculators and people just buying a house solely because they know it's a better store of value than the dollar, which is programmatically, mathematically designed to debase every time the Federal Reserve creates new dollars out of thin air.
Yeah, that's also an interesting point you brought up. The real estate market, I've worked in real estate for some time now, so I have a pretty decent understanding of this. But because people see real estate as a better investment than the dollar, which typically it is a better investment, it'll hold its value better over time than the dollar does. Everybody and their cats and their dogs want to put all their money into real estate, which is good for them, but in reality, that just drives the price of real estate up even higher. Right? That just crowds out the ability for a young single adult to go and buy their own house. Because everybody wants and is flooding their money into a propped up real estate market. Because people are using it for a store of value, when in reality, it really, for most instances, it should not be a store of value for people. Their money should be a sound enough store of value that they can use on whatever they want. Right? That's the nice thing about money, is that you can use it for whatever you want in the future. Whereas real estate, it kind of sucks because you have to sell the real estate. You'll take tax on the real estate. Right? You can't move your real estate from place to place. There's so many problems with it that make it like a worse store of value than a good money would. But because our money is so shitty and broken, people will use real estate to preserve their wealth, which in turn just jacks up the price of real estate, making it harder and harder, making the barrier of entry harder and harder, higher and higher for people to go and own a house.
Yeah, and to tie this back to the beginning, then it makes it harder to start a nuclear family because less and less people can afford homes. And I don't know if you know who Lynette Zing is. She's a gold bug. I recently just saw a video of her just talking about how ridiculous our system is. And in it, she made the point that these techno kleptocrats, whatever, are going to try and have it. You know, they're going to, oh, the convenience. You can just put all your stuff on your phone and the equity in your home. And you know what? We're going to make money where, say you want to draw from your, you know, the equity in your home. You don't even have to worry about going and refinancing it. You can just hit a few buttons on your phone and draw that equity and keep drawing that equity until next thing you know, you have no equity in the home. And then you're just renting all over again. And it's just funny how all these things tie into each other. And the Bitcoin path provides people a path to actually own more stuff, to let their money deflate, to let them get access to more and more markets, to let them flee tyranny if the state or nation they're living in is being oppressive. Or you can go the fiat route where everything gets more expensive. There's more nihilism. You know what? They'll probably accept you. The fatter you get, they're going to love it. So, you know, and if you want to do like, they'll give you freedoms and all these things that I don't want to say they don't matter, but they're not gonna help you in life. You know, they'll give you freedoms and all the things that will let them solidify their control essentially.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You kind of mentioned like the polarity between the fiat system and the sound money system. And I think there is, in reality, the fiat system that we have is extremely polarizing. Because for me, right, I want 15 kids, big family, big house, all these nice things. I just want to live like a normal, sound, reasonable life. But the fiat system that I've been raised in, that I'm living in now, does not allow me to just go get a job and do those things, right? A minimum wage job, I'll have a take-home income of $300 after taxes and rent and car payments and all these things. $300 is not going to support a 10-kid family, right? So for people to get what they want in life, like to have a big, healthy, beautiful family, right? Live a life of freedom and autonomy and all these things, you have to be so much more productive than people did in times of old, right? 50s, 40s, 30s, right? 100 years ago, people could be a sheep farmer and they would have 12 kids and they would get by just fine and their wife wouldn't even work, right? Whereas now, if you want those things, you have to be so uber successful and focused on providing yourself with those assets, with those systems, with those financial resources to build you out into the future. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners realize this, and it helps them to be more productive in the long run. But on the other hand, the people who aren't up for that challenge that the fiat system has created for them, they will just live in their pods and they will have an internet girlfriend that they pay $2 a month for.
With their cricket protein powder smoothie.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it really is a polarizing force. I'm sure you can see it in people, just by seeing how their brain works and how they talk and how they speak and operate. You know, right from the get-go, if they're red-pilled or blue-pilled or based or, soy. you can tell. It's not hard to tell. Like there's two classes of people forming.
100%. Well, Jens, man, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on. Everyone, I recommend you go check out his Substack, The Good. We've got a lot of value reading that. Where else can people find you online? And I know you do some woodworking too. Is there anywhere anyone can go to look up your woodworking?
Yeah, thanks for that. No, just right now, just my Substack, The Good X. I need to change my name. I was making a Substack and The Good was already taken. I was like, I'm not coming up with a new name right now. I just need to get this done.
I'll link it so people can find it appropriately.
Yeah, thanks. And then my Twitter handle is Never Compromise. Compromise with a K. I'll probably actually be posting some of my woodworks on there at some point soon, but not right now, not as of now. But stay tuned for that. Get yourself some nice quality goods.
Nice. I'm excited. I'm hoping you're accepting Bitcoin too.
Of course.
Naturally. Awesome. All right, guys. Thank you for listening.